There is a particular moment you may know well. It arrives without announcement, usually in the middle of something ordinary. You are at a dinner table surrounded by conversation, or standing in a crowded room where music is too loud and the laughter feels performative, or you are simply scrolling through your phone at the end of a day that exhausted you in ways you cannot fully explain. And something inside you goes very quiet. Not sad exactly, not angry. Just quiet in a way that feels like a refusal, like a door closing softly but firmly. You feel the pull to step back, to stop participating, to find a room where no one will speak to you for a while, maybe for a long while. And the frightening part is not the feeling itself. The frightening part is how good it sounds. The frightening part is how much you want it. You have probably tried to explain this to people and found that the words come out wrong. They hear withdrawal and they think depression. They hear the need for silence and they think antisocial. They hear your exhaustion with noise and conversation and the constant demands of a social world, and they offer you advice about getting out more, about not isolating yourself, about the importance of connection. And you nod and say yes, you will try. But inside you feel a deeper weariness at having to defend something that does not feel like a problem at all. It feels like knowing something, like your own interior life is trying to tell you something important that the noise of ordinary existence keeps drowning out. What I want to explore with you today is the possibility that this urge, this pull toward withdrawal and silence, is not a symptom of something broken in you. It is not a warning sign of pathology, nor is it the beginning of a descent into unhealthy isolation. It may, in fact, be one of the most ancient and necessary functions of a genuinely awake human mind. It may be your consciousness doing exactly what consciousness is designed to do when the conditions are right, which is to say, when the noise finally becomes too loud to ignore, and the interior life can no longer be postponed. Hannah Arendt, the philosopher whose work I keep returning to when I try to understand the most honest dimensions of human experience, made a distinction that I find illuminating here. She distinguished between what she called the vita activa and the vita contemplativa. These are Latin phrases that translate roughly as the active life and the contemplative life. The vita activa encompasses everything we do in the world: labor, work, action, participation, the whole busy performance of being a person among other people. The vita contemplativa is something different. It is the life of the mind turned inward. It is thinking, questioning, examining, sitting in genuine stillness with the contents of one's own consciousness. And Arendt was deeply interested in what happens when these two modes of existence fall out of balance. What happens, she asked, when a person becomes so consumed by the demands of the active life that the contemplative life is abandoned entirely? Her answer was not comfortable. She believed that the loss of genuine thinking, the kind of slow, patient interior examination that requires silence and withdrawal from the noise of collective life, was one of the most dangerous conditions a human being could find themselves in. If this perspective is opening something up for you, consider subscribing. I explore these questions every week, and I would love to have you along for this ongoing inquiry. When Arendt wrote about thinking, she was not describing the kind of rapid processing we usually mean when we use that word. She was not talking about problem solving or strategic planning or the mental activity that accompanies getting things done. She was talking about something much slower and stranger, something she called the two-in-one, the internal dialogue that a reflective person has with themselves. She described it as a kind of company you keep with yourself, an internal conversation between different aspects of your own understanding. She believed this kind of thinking was not a luxury or a personality preference. She believed it was a moral necessity. Without it, she argued, a person becomes capable of almost anything, not because they are evil, but because they have never truly examined what they are doing or why. The unexamined life, in Arendt's framework, is not merely an incomplete life, it is a dangerous one. And here is where I want to stay for a moment, because I think this is the piece that gets lost when we talk about the urge to withdraw. We live in a culture that has decided more or less collectively that stillness is suspicious, that silence is avoidance, that a person who needs time alone is a person who has trouble connecting, who is afraid of intimacy, who needs to work on their social skills or their openness or their capacity for engagement. We have built an entire vocabulary of pathology around the natural human need to step back from the world and spend time in the company of one's own thoughts. Introversion has been reframed as a personality trait to manage rather than a valid mode of being. The need for quiet has been medicalized and analyzed and treated as a problem to solve. And the result is that millions of people who feel the pull toward withdrawal feel it with guilt attached, feel it as a failure, feel it as something they should hide or overcome, rather than something they should follow. I know many of you watching this have been carrying this alone for a long time. You have wondered if something is wrong with you for wanting so badly to step away from the world. You have sat in social situations feeling the pull towards silence and felt ashamed of it, felt like you were failing at some basic requirement of human life. You have pushed yourself back into the noise again and again and wondered why you keep running out of something that other people seem to have in endless supply. Tell me in the comments how long you've been feeling this way. Tell me when you first noticed that the world had become too loud for you. And if the words are hard to find right now, if it is easier to start small, just type this: I need the quiet too. Because someone else watching this right now needs to see those words. They need to know they are not the only ones sitting with this particular exhaustion, and your willingness to name it creates permission for them to do the same. What Arendt understood, and what I think we have largely forgotten, is that withdrawal from the noise of collective life is not the opposite of engagement with reality. It is often the precondition for genuine engagement. You cannot think clearly about something you are too immersed in to see. You cannot examine the assumptions you are living by if you never create the distance necessary to observe them. The fisherman who has spent years on the water does not understand the ocean more deeply simply because he has never left it. He understands the surface, the rhythms, the practical patterns that allow him to navigate. But the deeper structure of the water, its patterns beneath the observable waves, its geological history, the forces that move it, these require a different kind of attention. They require stepping back. They require bringing a different kind of awareness to bear. This is not a metaphor about productivity. I am not suggesting that withdrawal is valuable because it makes you more effective when you return to action. That would be to accept the framework I am questioning, the idea that everything must justify itself in terms of its contribution to the vita activa, its usefulness, its output, its measurable effect. Arendt was suspicious of precisely that kind of reasoning. She believed that thinking had value in itself, not because of what it produced, but because of what it was. The examined life was worth living not because examination made you a better worker or a more efficient participant in society, but because the examination itself was a form of being fully human. To think was to be present to your own existence in the deepest possible way. To refuse thinking, to fill every moment with activity and noise and the business of getting things done, was to be absent from yourself in a manner that no amount of accomplishment could compensate for. There is something Arendt wrote that I have never been able to stop thinking about. She described thinking as a practice that is always out of order, always disruptive, always pulling the thinker away from the smooth functioning of ordinary life. To begin thinking about something, she observed, is to stop doing it in the unreflective way you were doing it before. The cobbler who thinks carefully about what it means to make shoes can no longer simply make shoes in the easy, automatic way he did before the thinking began. The person who thinks carefully about what it means to participate in a particular social arrangement can no longer participate in that arrangement in the same unreflective, comfortable way. Thinking interrupts. Thinking makes the simple complicated and the comfortable uncertain. And this, she believed, was precisely its value. Not because complication is pleasant, it is not, but because the unreflective life, the life that flows smoothly through its routines without ever pausing to examine them, is the life most at risk of participating in things that ought to be questioned. This is why the urge towards silence is not weakness. This is why the need to step back from the relentless momentum of social and professional and digital life is not failure. It is, in many cases, the mind reaching for the conditions it needs to do something that noise makes impossible. And here is what I think is crucial to understand. Your mind is not asking for emptiness when it reaches for silence. It is asking for a particular kind of fullness, a kind of presence to your own thinking that the noise of ordinary life systematically prevents. Think about what happens in those moments when you finally get the quiet you have been craving. You may be sitting alone in a room or walking without a destination, or lying in bed in the early morning before the day has started to demand things from you. And at first there is relief. The relief of not being needed, of not being observed, of not having to perform the ordinary self that social life requires. But then something else begins. Thoughts arrive that have been waiting. Questions surface that you have been too busy to notice. Feelings that have been submerged beneath the activity show themselves. There is something almost uncomfortable about it. Something that makes you understand why people prefer noise, because the quiet is not empty at all. It is crowded with everything you have been postponing. Arendt described genuine solitude as distinct from loneliness. Loneliness, in her understanding, was the condition of being cut off from others and finding no compensating companionship within oneself. It was an impoverishment, a kind of exile. But solitude was different. Solitude was the state of being alone with yourself in the truest sense, alone with that interior dialogue, that two-in-one, the conversation between different aspects of your own mind. And she believed that solitude of this kind was not isolation at all. She believed it was one of the most genuinely inhabited conditions a human being could be in. You are more fully present in genuine solitude than you are in many forms of company, because in genuine solitude, you cannot escape yourself. You cannot hide behind the performance the social world requires. You are simply there with your own thinking, doing the work that only thinking can do. This distinction matters enormously if you are someone who feels the pull toward withdrawal, because it changes what you understand yourself to be seeking. You are not seeking to escape. You are not running away from life or from people or from responsibility. You are seeking the conditions in which a particular kind of life becomes possible. The interior life, the contemplative life, the life in which the questions that matter most can actually be heard and examined rather than perpetually drowned out by everything else. Now, there is a complication here that I want to address honestly, because I do not think it serves anyone to romanticize the need for withdrawal without also examining its shadows. Arendt herself was careful about this. She did not believe that the contemplative life was superior to the active life. She did not think that retreat into thinking was a solution to the problems of the world or an escape from the demands of shared existence. She was, in fact, deeply suspicious of any philosophy that used the need for interior life as a justification for disengaging from the world entirely. The thinker who retreats permanently into contemplation and refuses the demands of the vita activa, she argued, has misunderstood something important about the human condition. We are, she insisted, beings of plurality. We exist among others. The space of appearance, the realm in which we show ourselves to one another and act in concert, is not simply an obstacle to the good life. It is part of what makes us human. So the question is not whether to withdraw, but how to understand what the withdrawal is for. And I think this is where many people get stuck, because they experience the pull towards silence as a binary. Either you participate in the noise of the world, or you retreat from it. Either you are socially engaged, or you are isolating. Either you are present to others, or you are present to yourself. But this binary is false. It is a false choice that the pace of modern life has forced upon us. The choice between doing and thinking, between being in the world and being with yourself. The truth is that genuine engagement with the world, the kind of engagement that is thoughtful rather than automatic, that is chosen rather than compelled, that emerges from genuine understanding rather than unreflective habit. This kind of engagement requires the silence that precedes it. The withdrawal is not the alternative to being in the world. It is what makes it possible to be in the world in a way that is genuinely yours, rather than simply the world's demands performing themselves through you. There is a concept in Arendt's work called natality, her term for the human capacity to begin something new, to bring something into existence that was not there before, to act in ways that could not have been predicted from the conditions that preceded them. She considered this one of the most profound and distinctive features of human existence. We are not simply the products of what has been. We are beings capable of genuine beginning. And she believed that this capacity was intimately connected to the practice of thinking. The person who has never thought carefully about their own life, who has never withdrawn from the momentum of existing patterns to ask whether those patterns are truly theirs, this person is less free than they know. Not because someone has taken their freedom, but because they have never made contact with the interior ground from which genuine choice, genuine beginning, genuine natality emerges. The silence is not just rest, it is the soil in which new beginning becomes possible. If what I'm sharing here has been resonating with something you have been feeling, something you have not quite been able to name or justify, I want to invite you into a larger conversation. There are many of us exploring these questions, sitting with the discomfort of thinking carefully about our own lives, learning to honor the interior demands that the noise of the world would prefer we ignore. I create these explorations for people who are not satisfied with surface answers, who want to understand rather than simply feel better for a few minutes. If that is you, consider subscribing. Not because you need more content, but because this kind of thinking is easier when you know you are not doing it alone. I will be here every week, pulling on these threads, following these questions wherever they lead, and I would be genuinely honored to have you here as part of this. Let me try to bring this into something more concrete, because philosophy without grounding in actual experience becomes another form of noise. Consider what happens to the quality of your thinking, your relationships, your choices, your sense of yourself when you have gone too long without genuine silence. You may notice a kind of flatness settling over experience. Things that should feel significant begin to feel thin. Conversations feel like they are happening at the surface of things without ever reaching anything real. You go through the motions of your life with a competence that is almost mechanical, completing tasks and meeting obligations and saying the right things at the right times, but with a growing sense that you are not quite there, that some essential part of you has gone offline. This is not depression in the clinical sense, though it can feel similar. It is something more specific. It is the depletion that comes from extended withdrawal from your own interior life. It is what happens when the contemplative capacity has been suppressed for too long by the relentless demands of the active life. And the instinct to withdraw, when it comes, is the system trying to correct itself. It is not pathology. It is not avoidance. It is not a personality flaw. It is the intelligence of your own mind recognizing what it needs and asking for it in the clearest language available to it, which is not words, but the felt quality of a pull, a direction, an inclination towards stillness and away from noise. The problem is that we have built a world that pathologizes this instinct almost reflexively. The pull toward withdrawal is interpreted as a symptom. The need for silence is read as a failure of social functioning. The person who cancels plans to spend an evening alone is understood to be struggling rather than thriving, and so we have generations of people who have been taught to distrust one of their most reliable internal signals, who override the need for contemplative withdrawal because they have been told that the override is health and the need itself is illness. Arendt would have found this deeply troubling, and I think she would have understood it as connected to something broader about the modern condition, which is the triumph of the vita activa over the vita contemplativa at a civilizational level. We have built a world organized entirely around doing, producing, optimizing, participating, performing. The value of a life is measured in its outputs, its visibility, its engagement with the world. The interior life, the thinking life, the life of genuine examination and slow contemplation, has no metrics. It produces nothing you can show anyone. It cannot be optimized or quantified or included in any annual review, and so it is systematically devalued, scheduled last, perpetually postponed, justified only when it can be connected to some improvement in the active life it interrupts. But here is what gets lost in this arrangement. Here is what I think the urge toward withdrawal is trying to preserve. The self, not the performing self, not the socially legible self that knows how to navigate expectations and fulfill roles and say the right things, but the examining self, the questioning self. The self that is capable of genuine surprise at its own assumptions, capable of changing its mind in the deep way that only genuine thinking produces. This self requires silence to exist. It cannot survive the noise. It is not robust enough for constant exposure to the demands of the active world. It needs the shelter of withdrawal to remain alive. And I want to say something about that word, needs, because I think we have become uncomfortable with it in the context of interior life. We are comfortable with needs that have obvious physical reference. The body needs food, rest, warmth. But when we say that the mind needs silence, that consciousness needs withdrawal, that the examining self needs time apart from the performance of social life, we often qualify it immediately. We hedge it, we apologize for it, we frame it as a preference rather than a genuine requirement. But it is a requirement. Arendt's entire body of work is in many ways an argument for the recognition that thinking is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Not a luxury of the privileged or the intellectual or the unusually introverted. A necessity of being human in the fullest possible sense. Think about the moments in your life when you made a decision that you later recognized as not really yours. A commitment entered into because the momentum of events made saying no feel impossible. A path continued because stopping required an examination you kept postponing. A relationship maintained because the discomfort of honest assessment was easier to avoid than face. I am not speaking about failure or regret in the ordinary sense. I am speaking about the particular experience of recognizing that something was decided in you by the force of circumstance and social pressure, and the unreflective continuation of existing patterns rather than by genuine choice emerging from genuine thinking. This is what Arendt meant when she connected thinking to freedom, not the abstract political freedom to vote or move or choose between options, but the interior freedom that comes from actually examining your own life, from actually bringing the questioning attention of the two in one to bear on the assumptions and patterns and commitments that constitute your particular existence. And this examination is only possible in conditions of something close to silence. Not the silence of the grave or the silence of meditation retreats or the silence of exceptional spiritual practice, though all of these have their place, but the ordinary silence of a person sitting quietly with their own thoughts, resisting the impulse to fill the space, allowing the questions to surface, following them honestly wherever they lead. This is not difficult. It requires no training or discipline or special capacity. It requires only that you honor the pull when it comes, rather than override it. That you recognize the urge toward withdrawal not as a problem to manage, but as an invitation to follow. Here is where I want to offer something that I think is genuinely reframing rather than simply comforting. The experience you have been having, the pull towards silence, the exhaustion with noise, the sense that the social world is demanding more than you can give. This is not evidence that something has gone wrong in you. It may be evidence that something is going right. It may be evidence that your interior life is alive and active and refusing the suppression that the demands of ordinary existence have been imposing on it. The pull is not absence of vitality. It may be the most vital thing happening in you right now. Arendt wrote about what she called the soundless dialogue of the soul with itself. This phrase has stayed with me for years because of its precision. Soundless. The dialogue that cannot occur in the presence of sound. The thinking that cannot happen against the backdrop of noise. The examination that requires, as its basic condition, the absence of the very thing that modern life provides in such abundance. The soul talking to itself, which is to say, the person talking to themselves in the deepest possible sense. Not the trivial self-talk of daily life, but the genuine interior conversation in which what you actually think separate from what you are expected to think, what you actually feel, separate from what is socially sanctioned to feel, what you actually want, separate from what has been decided for you by the accumulated momentum of your life. These things begin to become audible, and they cannot become audible if you are always in the noise. I want to be careful here, not to idealize withdrawal or suggest that the contemplative life is without its own difficulties. The silence that allows genuine thinking also allows the surfacing of things that are uncomfortable to examine. The questions that arise in genuine stillness are not always pleasant questions. The self that appears in the soundless dialogue is not always the self you would prefer to find there. Thinking, as Arendt understood it, is a disruptive activity. It unsettles what has been settled. It complicates what has felt simple. It raises the kind of questions whose answers cannot leave everything exactly as it was. There is a reason that many people prefer noise. The noise is not only an external imposition, it is often a chosen shield against the demands of genuine self-examination. But if you are someone who feels the pull toward withdrawal, who keeps encountering the desire for silence in yourself, and has been treating it as a problem, then I suspect you have already begun to understand that the discomfort of genuine thinking is preferable to the particular kind of numbness that comes from its permanent postponement. I suspect you have noticed that the silence you have been avoiding contains something important, something that wants your attention, something that the noise has been successfully preventing you from hearing. There is a final dimension to this that I think deserves careful attention, which is the relationship between withdrawal and what we might call return. Arendt was clear that the vita contemplativa, while essential, was not the whole of human existence. The thinking that happens in silence is not meant to remain in silence. It is meant to inform action, to shape presence, to bring the quality of genuine examination to bear on the life that is lived among others. The person who has spent time with their own thinking does not return to the world as the same person who left it. They return potentially with greater clarity about what they actually think, what they actually value, what they are actually willing to do and not do. They return capable of the kind of genuine action that Arendt distinguished from mere behavior, the kind of action that emerges from genuine thought and genuine choice, rather than from the unreflective continuation of existing patterns. So the silence you are being pulled toward is not an ending. It is a kind of preparation, not preparation in the instrumental sense, not silence as a tool for becoming more productive or more socially effective or more capable of meeting the demands of the active world, but preparation in the deeper sense of becoming more fully yourself, more genuinely present to your own thinking, more capable of the kind of chosen engagement with the world that is actually yours, rather than simply the world's demands performing themselves through you. The withdrawal is the condition of genuine return. What you are feeling when you feel the pull towards silence is something very old and very human. It is the mind asking for what it has always needed. It is the interior life refusing to be permanently suppressed by the demands of the exterior one. It is the examining self, the two-in-one that Arendt described, insisting on its right to exist and to speak and to be heard above the noise. And the question ultimately is not whether you will honor that pull. The question is whether you will honor it with the respect it deserves by recognizing it not as weakness or avoidance or failure of social functioning, but as one of the most intelligent and genuinely human things your mind is capable of doing. Go toward the silence, not away from life, but toward a particular quality of being alive, toward the kind of presence that only the absence of noise makes possible, toward the dialogue that has been waiting for you to be still enough to hear it. The world will still be there when you return, and you will return to it more genuinely yourself than you left. If this exploration has spoken to something you have been carrying, something you have not fully been able to articulate until now, I want you to know that this channel exists precisely for people like you. People who are done with surface answers. People who want to think carefully and honestly about what it means to be alive in the way that you are alive, with the particular mind and the particular interior life and the particular exhaustion with noise that you have. I will be here every week with another exploration, another thread to pull, another question worth sitting with. Consider subscribing, not as a transaction, but as an act of companionship on a journey worth taking seriously. And tell me in the comments what resonates most from what we explored today. I read every single one, and your thinking illuminates things I have not yet found the words for. You are not alone in this. The silence you have been seeking has always been available. And so has this community of people who understand why you need it. The urge to withdraw from everything is not a malfunction. It never was. It is your mind doing something remarkably precise, asking for the conditions in which it can finally hear itself. That is not withdrawal from life. That is perhaps the beginning of living it.